Hey, so lately when I see and read the news, with a lot of dumb people out there, I always wondered, um, does it make sense if United States had a free public education program? What benefits would it bring, or would it devalue the whole education system? So I just wanted to bring this topic up, whether it would improve society as a whole, or would it demerit the whole innovative education system?
All right. So first clarification question. When you say free here, are you saying like free in the sense that it actually costs nothing? Or are you talking about like as in the government pays for you and it's part of the tax?
I guess in a sense, like either way, if it's like completely down to like a couple $1,000s that most people can afford, that's like close to free. In a sense that you're not, when I mean by free, it's more like it's not complete. You don't have to take a loan out and you don't have to like break your back over trying to afford college. Like no one should ever wake up, like no kid in high school should ever have the question, can I afford college?
Right.
That's
And
what I
so
mean.
this is like in contrast to high school, like because high school's free, right?
Yeah.
But it's mandatory, whereas college is not mandatory and would not be
Mhm.
under the free college system.
Yeah.
So that's sort of
I,
like the difference, right?
I guess the point of my question was like, do we want to like limit the scope of discussion to just the benefits? Like if it were free, like what's good about it? Or because otherwise if we start like I don't want to sidetrack the thing into like, okay, well, how are we going to finance it? Because that's often how these sorts of conversations kind of go, right? When you look at kind of the
Well,
practicalities of
I
it.
think that's an important part of the conversation, right? Like, yeah, there's like good things about it, but yeah, how are we going to finance it, right?
So
I
I
mean,
guess
those
we
are
could,
two very different discussions, right? So I just like want to
You can talk about both.
understand where we want to go with this.
I guess we can start first with like, what is this worth it? Like, let's ignore the financing aspect for now. Think about like what kind of impact does a free public education kind of bring on society?
Okay.
Yeah, so my hypothesis here is that it's a net economic good. And I think the first example that comes to mind is COVID, right? Like, I'm sure if we looked at the level of college education and the rate of mask compliance, or not going to bars unmasked and not doing like risky behaviors, like how much is the U.S. being generally undereducated, um, contributing to like the massive cost of the coronavirus pandemic, right? Like if everyone had a sufficient college education, I do think that we'd see significantly lower rates of COVID and significantly lower rates of shutdown and economic pain, which I think would pay for the free college in itself. You know, so at the very least, I think there's a huge social cost to people just not knowing the right things to do to help each other and help themselves.
Mm. So the main question for me, I was mentioning this just now, is like, how is this like better than the sort of the public education K through 12 system? Like, why do we need why do you even need college like on top of that? Like, like, are we just gonna extend K through 12 to like K through 16 now or something? Like, what's the point of like adding free college on top of
I
already
will
free
say, as someone who did not go to high school in the United States, the other day I was talking with my brother. He went to high school in the United States, and he was telling me about his experience, compare his experience schooling overseas versus in the States. And I was just like, wow, American high schools suck. It's such a shitty experience. Like, I can't believe you had to deal with all this crap. Like, he's telling me about how they were still like telling him like, oh, you can't go to the bathroom more than like twice a week or something, and like there's like bathroom pass. I'm like, what is going on here? Right? It's kind of ridiculous. So I mean, I don't have too much faith if you're really going to frame it as K through 16. I don't think another 4 more years are going to do people any good, right? Especially if they're going to still tell you you can't go to the bathroom more than 2 times a week. Otherwise, you're like going to the principal's office. Like, what the fuck?
So I guess, I don't know, my suggestion would be like, why don't we put this money towards like the K through 12 education instead of like college? Like, why is it that like college is going to educate people any more than, I don't know, fixing sort of like the foundation of education.
I mean,
I
I
guess-
think college provides different things, right? Like
Yeah.
when you go to college, you get exposed to people with different backgrounds. You know, I'm sure you could facilitate that in another way besides higher education.
And you're also a different, like K through 12. I mean, they're there because they're like because you have a different mental capacity to absorb shit. Whereas in college, you're mentally more developed, and you have, I guess, like you grasp and you react to opinions and new ideas differently than when you are in K through 12.
So does that mean we just need to send kids to school later so that they have more brain development before they actually are taught stuff? Because you teach them too early.
kids
it's
soak
useless.
up information more easily when they're younger, right?
But
Like
the difference
languages,
is
for example.
K through 12, my bad, Justin, but I was just going to say K through 12, like, I don't know. In my opinion, the purpose of like schooling from K through 12 isn't to like teach them fucking microbiology or some shit. It's just to like get them socialized with like kids, how to like help them understand social cues, how to like deal with people, how to like make friends and all that shit. Right. I feel like that's the big part of like K through 12. Like, yeah, you have your basic knowledge of math, science, all that shit that kind of goes into college. But college is where you kind of learn like what do you want to be passionate about, and you really dive deep into it. But K through 12 is more about like, you have your mentally developing stages, and you learn how to like basically deal with those situations. And you have different levels of friendship. Like the fucking friends you have in like kindergarten, that's a different level of friendships than you have in middle school and like high school. That's just because people mentally develop as they get older, right? So I still feel like putting kids to school early is very important, just because like, interacting with friends and making friends and making those, having those memories very early on is still crucial to like their late stage development.
Yeah, and I would argue more crucial than like some of the late stage stuff. Like I feel like that's where the money should be going. If we're talking about free college, I just feel like, I sort of agree with Kevin. The American education system probably is pretty crappy compared to what he got in China. And so like, yeah, I mean, I would want to put the money there if we're talking about free college. That's like,
Yeah.
There's like a credentialism problem, right? The issue is that people want free college because employers are putting pressure on people to get degrees so they can get jobs. So, I mean, yeah, we could put the money into the K through 12 system, but that doesn't help you if you're, graduating high school and you need to get a job. And the only way to do so, to get one that's like got good benefits and a good salary, is to, go to this expensive 4-year school.
that's a
right?
fair point. So that it'll like sort of help with like income inequalities.
I was
Right.
thinking the
I
same
think that's usually
thing.
the main argument for it, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, it's because the college degree has become essential in this economy. That's why we need to make it public.
So that was kind of my point when I said, do you think when you make it free, now do you think it might devalue the existing educations? Like, kind of like it's like you have these Ivy Leagues and big colleges that are kind of like the circle jerk of money. Just because of like rich people go there, or like people with money go there, they get into businesses, they support the existing colleges. It's just like basically big big companies that.
It's like a self-contained cycle.
Yeah, so big companies look to hire people or kids from these colleges because they obviously they're in a competitive environment, but they also went to those similar level colleges, and they in turn believe that these are the kids that are more worth it than XXX people. It's kind of, yeah. So that's what I'm saying. When you make it free, do you think it would kind of devalue a certain elements of these like prestigious colleges that kind of like, so when you say help with income inequality, now do you think employers are not as likely to look toward these colleges and would expand their network?
Oh, to
No,
the
I think-
contrary.
No.
I think
I disagree.
I think if you truly made it free, the Ivies are going to be all the more valuable, because ultimately it's kind of like if you make the college degree the baseline, then there's nothing inherently good about it, and people are still going to try to be selective, right? Like, this is the thing I don't like about college admissions in general. It's just kind of like, these are all great people, right? But you have to try to nitpick some random little detail to say, oh, but this guy's slightly better, right? So if college degree is a baseline, then branding on top of that is going to become the differentiating factor. So if anything, the Ivies are going to get more like valuable than
Yeah,
prestige.
I mean, you can look at what's happened to law schools over the past 20 years. Like, the number of people graduating from law school is too high compared to the demand for those jobs. So the most selective schools, the top 15, are as important as ever, right? If you don't get into one of those, you cannot expect to be like making a good salary as a lawyer, have a prestigious job, or really a job that's desirable at all, right? So yeah, I mean, you increase supply, and you'll have a glut of people at the lower ranks who will devalue those degrees, those programs. So like, I don't know, I was thinking about like how they do it in Australia, which is, I believe, it's like public education, like higher education is publicly, huh?
Is that a real country?
Yes, in fact.
Yeah, but it's a fake continent.
Yeah, but I think they finance your degree, right? They subsidize a 4-year degree. It's obviously cheaper than it is here, but the amount that they subsidize it by is based on the demand for that degree. So like teachers, for example, get a much more generous subsidy for their college education than, I don't know, like a history major, for example. And I think that's an interesting system, because like I kind of agree with Alan that like having a college educated population is a good thing for like the health of our democracy and public health, as we're seeing with COVID and stuff like that. But I also think like, some of the degrees out there are not, there's not high demand for like someone who's an expert in like ancient Mediterranean history, right?
Or underwater basket weaving.
Yeah, right. So we like need to construct incentives that push people to do things that society needs, right? Like if we need more teachers, then we should incentivize people to major in education by making it cheaper than the other degrees.
In principle,
Yeah.
that just goes into the vein of the command economy, right? Which is kind of the antithesis of market economy that most capitalist systems function on, right? It's kind of someone in some bureaucratic position is able to say, hey, we need more of X, Y, and Z. You can try to use money as an incentive, but ultimately that's, in econ lingo, that's distorting the market conditions, and you get like, weird outcomes that are unintended in many cases.
Well,
So-
I mean, you can think of it as like the government is making an investment into all these students to go and get degrees, and it wants the greatest payback, I guess, in the form of tax revenue from high incomes or whatever as possible. So it should choose to invest in the degrees that people will get jobs with, that there is demand for. So it would really be tied to like the market's demand for jobs, particular jobs.
Well, then the question for me becomes like, why hasn't the current system been able to do that? Because surely people are aware of the different expected incomes out of different degrees, right? So if, that was attractive to them, like they would have already chosen those degrees. Do you kind of see what I'm saying? Like, why do we need this extra system?
Well, you get to a good point, and I follow this dude on Twitter who's like very anti-debt relief for students, because he sees it as, it's an issue of personal responsibility, right? Yeah, you chose to get this degree that ended up not being in demand. You should have known that when you made the decision to go to college and dedicate all of this time and money to getting that degree. And it's a controversial position because obviously in the news, Joe Biden is considering student debt relief, and the Democrats are kind of pushing this idea that we should like just cancel $50,000 of student debt for everyone in America that has student debt. But I mean, I think that a lot of 18-year-olds operate under a different kind of framework of decision making than might be rational, right? Like I remember when I was 18, I don't think I was thinking about future income or market demand for my degree as much as I would today. So
yeah, I
I
still wasn't.
Yeah,
I would have never picked psychology.
Yeah, I don't think 18-year-olds make rational decisions. I mean, scientifically, their brains are not fully developed, right? And they operate under all of these different actors, their parents, college counselors at their high school, whatever, who are like, oh, you should do what you're passionate about, you should do what you're interested in. You don't need to worry about getting a job later on, or they just don't emphasize that point.
So they're
That's
the
why we
problem.
have this
They're
misaligned
lying.
incentives. I mean, that's what this dude on Twitter says, right? And a lot of conservatives seem to believe, yeah. I mean, I do kind of agree. Like, I think it's troubling that people choose degrees that, don't end up being worth it in the long run. And I think that is a problem that needs to be fixed. I feel like in a lot of ways we're treating college right now as this like luxury experience where you go to discover yourself for 4 years, and it's part of like being a young adult. It's fun and you party and stuff. But when it comes to like the raw like economic dimension of it, like, oh, we have these jobs that require these skills and we need these people to fill it. We're not quite emphasizing that part when we tell people to go to college. That's the hot take. That's my hot take.
So, like, you want more trade schools?
I mean, I think that's one popular solution. Or emphasizing
I mean, I
STEM
think-
education.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the statistic you always see is like the inflation of like tuition and higher education has rapidly outpaced income, right? So on the flip side, a lot of people are just saying, we need to make people's incomes higher. I'm actually not too. What was I actually read a good explanation of why it's increased. I think it's something around like every other industry has increased in productivity, but college campuses, their professors are roughly as productive today as they were like 5 decades ago. But the cost of
in what way?
like in terms of like generating grants or how many classes can you teach in one day? There's no way of like really automating a professor's job, right? And so while the professor may be earning for the school like the same amount of money over time, the cost of like paying the professors and of like maintaining their land and everything that comes with running a university has like shot up accordingly. And so the only way to balance the books, if you can't increase productivity, is just making your students pay more.
I thought the more cynical explanation for the increase was that we have a federal loan program that, basically lets everyone go to college, and the universities can just kind of bank all this federal money endlessly.
Oh,
Right.
like with the houses in 2008, right? Where it just
I think
backed
by the
government. It's okay. No worries.
The thing is, these universities have competitors, right? Like if Harvard decides like, oh, tuition now is something $100K a year, and Stanford's like, well, we offer the same level of education, but we're only $50K. Obviously they're going to see a lot more high quality applicants, a lot more applicants and everything. So I would think that there's enough competition in the education space to prevent that from happening. I think it's a mix of both though, because I don't know, I really buy into the lack of like productivity growth due to technology in college.
What if they're just colluding?
I mean, wouldn't they just reach an equilibrium like they have, where they all charge about the same price and just move up in lockstep over time? That seems to be what's happening, right? Like Rice raises his tuition like a couple K every year, just like every other top 20 university or top 50.
But I think there's a reason they do, right? I don't necessarily think they do it because like Notre Dame's doing it. I think they do it because they need to pay more to retain their professors, to retain their intellectual talent, right? And
I mean, it's probably a mix of both, right? I definitely think the incentive of like, oh, this federal money is like a fire hose and it will never end. And hey, I mean, Joe Biden might just sign an executive order to cancel like a huge chunk of it in next year, right? So it's kind of meaningless, right? It's just free money that's flowing.
But I mean, when you look at how many like especially private institutions at the elite level like pay for so many of their students, like Harvard, Rice now even, like they're all known for giving like really generous financial aid and everything.
Yeah.
Right. I don't think they would do that if their pure goal was like turning a profit, right? Like they do that because their competitors are doing it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think their goal is going to be driven by profit per se. They need to make enough to balance the books so they don't get run into the. But like, I think I would guess that the primary goal is to increase the prestige of the university, whatever that means.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, you look at, I mean, Rice alone has built how many new buildings for the past 10 years, right? All of the schools seem to be undergoing these building booms and investing in these huge new student centers and department buildings and whatever. So yeah, I mean, these are nonprofit institutions. Their goal is not to return money to shareholders. But the prestige factor is definitely part of it. And I think, again, the federal money plays into all of this, right? It kind of enables this behavior by saying the federal government is backing, all of these high tuition fees. The students can pay it because the federal government gives out these incredibly generous loans that allow, it's a flow of money to the universities. And yeah.
I really liked
Yeah,
your
in
point
term-
earlier about how college is like a luxury experience. I don't know. I feel like that's sort of what it was for me. I don't know about you guys, but like, I just, it's this sort of vague young adult experience. You go and party and meet new people from around the world. And it's like, like how much are we really thinking about like, I don't know, sort of how we're going to be productive as like the next generation of this society. And so that makes me, as far as Nigel's question of whether or not we should have free college, that makes me think no, given the way college is certainly set up, is like currently set up, that it's like sort of this luxury experience. I don't think it should be free for everybody. Like, or it's like, I don't know, is that something that we really want? Like, is college really good?
But I mean, it's a luxury experience for those of us who are privileged enough to see it like that, right? Like, I think for a lot of my friends who came to college because they were like, this is my way for a better life and for a life that my parents couldn't get. I don't think it was a luxury experience. I think they were working a lot. They were making sure they had the best grades and best chance at the best employers or grad schools they could, right? So I don't know. I agree. I think luxury, I certainly thought of it that way, but I think it was because I was lucky enough to do so. For a lot of people, it's not.
I was about to say that was definitely not a luxury experience for me, but so that's what I think.
What did college mean to you, Nigel? What were your sort of like, what were your 4 years at Rice like? Sort of, down the line, what did they mean to you? Like, how did they really develop you?
I guess for me, like, so just background, like neither of my parents went to college, so this was just like a first time college experience, just in general for my family. So it was just more, I don't know. I like, while at Rice, I kind of took it for granted, in a sense that it's just like everybody having fun, going to classes and stuff like that. But it was more towards the end when the realism hits in that you gotta go get a job and shit like that. That's when I found it like, it's much more like easier kind of trying to get certain jobs, going to more prestigious college and stuff like that. So for me, it was like, that's when I compare myself to like other people that went to colleges or didn't go to colleges around me, I found like there's a massive gap in between where I ended up and where they kind of ended up, in a sense, like after high school. I mean, in high school, everybody's kind of the same, you're all going to the same classes and shit, but like it was a big difference just going to college. Just like me having my own place and kind of like working in my own terms and stuff like that. That's like completely like a privilege that I probably never would have gotten if I did not go to Rice.
I guess the distinction that would probably be important to make here is that I from what you described, the way in which you got to where you are today, it involved a lot more than simply going to college, right? So on the issue of a free college system, like it's almost like having it just be free doesn't seem to confer all the benefits we would hope that a college system could confer, but the cost is already there. Do you take my point?
Yeah, so that's what I was kind of wondering, like how would it impact people like who go to college? Because there's a lot of people that go to college, get it like completely paid by their parents, and they don't, it doesn't really impact them because it's not their money, it's parents' money. There are some people who like really value it because they're like, okay, this is expensive, I need to focus and shit like that. And there are people who are like, okay, I don't care, this is just another phase of life. Like, I wonder what is the, I guess I'm more wondering about like how do people view college? So a good example would be like if you're in like a intro to physics class and you see this like 46-year-old veteran who like is paying for college and trying to get his first college degree? How does he value his time and money being in those college classes versus people who are like maybe just completely paid for, right? For them, it is essentially free. Like, I wonder like what does the difference in experience look like? And would it change if college in general was free? Like, would people still go to college with the intent to get value out of it? Or people are just like, oh, this is just another phase I just had to go through and I don't have to worry about it since it's free.
I think people would still go to college.
Hold on.
I mean, they would go to
question.
college, but I'm saying, do they get the same level of value out of it with the right intentions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, I don't know. Do people not get, like, in a world where K through 12 was privatized in part and like a lot of it like cost people money, and then we move to like a free for everyone system. It's like, do they not value it where it's free for everyone? You know?
So, yeah, so that's what I'm trying to say. Like, so in India, I don't know if you guys know, but like K through 12 is basically privatized. Like, everything is private school. No one really goes to public schools. People
There are
do.
public schools though, right?
Yeah, there are public schools in India. I mean, I'm not talking about colleges. So IIT and stuff like that, those are public government.
There's public K through 12 schools.
Yeah,
That's
there are
accurate?
public.
Yeah.
So there are public K through 12 schools, but so like where I was born, at least in that state, I'm pretty sure it's the same for basically almost all of India. Private education is a much like different game than if you went to public education for K through 12. Like K through 12, like it's like people like go to school and it's like they don't really care too much about grades and stuff like that. It's just all about like it's not as competitive. Whereas like K through 12, like private education in India, it's like cutting edge, like grade matters, like every little point matters. People are like vying for that. If you get like first place in your like what they call grade, so if you get first place in 10th grade, they put a fucking billboard up in the middle of the busiest street, put your face in this biggest
It's just
thing.
like China.
Yeah, and they say this guy got number one, and everyone's like, holy
That's
shit.
badass.
Yeah.
I mean, so these are like, so that's what I'm trying to say. In India, like those educate people, like parents, like sacrifice everything and pour their entire wealth of money into sending kids to like the highest like cost private school.
Right. So I don't know, bring that back to the free college question. You're saying that like
So like what I'm trying to say is like so let's say I'm in high school and I'm like, oh, okay, everyone's going to college, it's free, I don't have to worry about it, just like how I'd go to. So would I think of college as going to from like middle school to high school? Like I don't think of it as much of an impact. I'm like, oh, it's just like a natural next step in my education. Would you like, because like when you go to college, I feel like, yeah, you should be a little bit more selective in what you choose to major in, because that's what the path of life that you want to go down on. But if you make it more free, would people think less about it and more like, oh, it's time to experiment and like, I don't know, I want to do something like underwater basket weaving. It's not costing me anything. Like,
Well,
why
I mean,
would
there's still like a cost in time, right? There's an opportunity cost to attending, even if there's no tuition. I don't know if you would have this like freeloader problem. I think people would still recognize that, you know, it's effort and it's kind of a pain in the ass to like move somewhere different and do all of this academic shit to get a degree, right? Like, it's not easy for most people. So I think it would be okay.
Since we're like I feel like our conversation never fully detached itself from the costs of the education. I feel like might as well just bite the bullet here and say that, well, if we do make it free, I think it certainly doesn't encourage people to be more mindful about what the long-term career impact of their college experience is, right? Because at least some people right now, they're like, okay, I got to pay this loan back in like a couple of years, like, so I better like make some bank, right? But if it's free, like that slice of the population, however large it may be, they won't have to be thinking about this, right? And then really the professor's still getting paid. Like everything still costs money to run, right? So essentially it's just someone else is footing the bill. It's
So
just
there's going to be people
kind of
like that.
diffused.
There's going to be people like that, but there's also going to be people who can now go to college because it's free, and like these are people who are mindful about like how they spend their time, and like I feel like we have to sort of weigh these two sorts of populations.
I would argue that under the current system, those people are perfectly well served so long as there's enough federal loan money, right? Because if they are truly that mindful and like very, income oriented about the way they handle undergraduates, there are enough jobs, I think, out there that can pay off the debt and then they can come out net positive, right? And so like the current system can already serve that. But making it free doesn't really like.
I don't know. I don't know if I'd say that, just because like if you look at the average income out of a lot of like big universities and you look at the average amount of debt people need to take on, I don't know if you could really make that argument that's net positive versus just going into plumbing or a trade school out of like high school. Like the average Harvard grad makes something like 70K 1 through 5 years out of undergrad, which is, obviously it's Harvard, it costs a different amount, but like those numbers are lower for like state schools, which obviously cost less. But then, even if you take out loans, the interest payments, like I don't think it's easy to pay off that debt over a long period of time. And the fact that the lower income you are, the more saddled you are with that debt, the less likely you are to be able to build home equity in the future, pay for your children's college. Like, yeah, I think it's pretty booty for the whole income inequality issue.
If that's kind of, again, I'm trying to imagine a person who's kind of done their homework on this or have had guidance from people to help them look at kind of like, the NPV of a college degree, right? Like if the case is that for the kind of profession they're trying to pursue in undergrad, that they do the calculation, they're like, we don't expect you to like it to be worth it for you. I wouldn't encourage those people to go to college then, right? From a financial perspective, if truly the amount of income they expect themselves to be able to make versus the cost is just not worth it, then it's not good, right? This is an overpriced service. Like, so, when we have overpriced products on the market, we just don't buy them and they go away, or their price goes down kind of naturally, rather than us just say artificially everyone should get one, whether it's worth it or not for them.
But yeah, it's not like these products that are overpriced in the market. Like I don't know. I see college as closer to like insulin than I do like, I don't know, plastic surgery, in the sense that like if you can't afford insulin, people aren't going to be like, all right, well, guess you can go without it. Guess it's a little too outside your price range. It's not worth it. It's like, no, they need it. And I think in a similar sense, like, I think a lot of people in the world, whether they decide it's worth it financially, need a college education just so they can function in a world that's increasingly being disrupted digitally, or like being taken over by like diversity. Right?
Why not
like,
just make it mandatory then? Why not make it K through 16?
K through, I mean, so I think again we go into like the personal choice rule, right? Like everyone who wants a college education should, like, in a sense, like insulin is not a mandatory thing to buy. Like if you're diabetic and you don't want to buy insulin, you can just die, right? I think it's the same answer. I don't know. I think we should make college available to everyone who wants it, the same way we should make insulin affordable for everyone who wants it.
So then what about K through 12? What about like high school? Like, why do we make people go to high school?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all made up, right? Like we just put the arbitrary line of like, oh, how much education should people get?
And so then what makes college sort of in between now, where it shouldn't be mandatory, but should be available for everybody? Like what makes,
so then, I think the difference
makes the calculus change.
I think the real thing. Oh, sorry. Well, I was going to say the real thing is that K through 12 is like a subsidized daycare program that enables millions of adults to work. And once you reach the age of majority at 18, then the kids can be responsible for themselves. I think it's a huge unspoken purpose of mandatory public education is that it enables so many adults to go to work, right?
Well, yeah, that's also it kind of just allows our society to function. Like imagine having hordes of unstimulated children walking around the streets forming gangs and shit, because they're not inside learning algebra, Like that shit actually happens, you know?
And
Like,
yeah, you know,
fucking-
people not going
yeah.
to college and taking Psych 101, you know, same thing, right? Like, I don't know, like, at what point, like,
Well, but I
what
think
makes
there-
college
there
so
is
different from high
empirical-
school?
Well, the thing is, there's empirical evidence suggests that you are better off as like a person if you get this experience of going to a place that broadens your worldview.
So let's make it
Right.
mandatory.
I think it's like there's also evidence that exercise helps your life out, and eating well and not smoking and shit. But none of that shit's mandatory, right?
It
I
all
think-
has to do with the age of majority, right? Once you reach 18, you're seen as an adult and
Yep.
you're free to make your own decisions. But before that, the state is like, well, we need to have all these rules and requirements so that we don't have all of these underdeveloped kids going and forming gangs or whatever, because they do, right?
Yeah,
And
I don't
having
think
public
it's as
education
simple
is
as-
great to avoid that.
Yeah, it's not as simple as it's good, so we should make it mandatory, or it's not good, so we should just fuck it over, and whoever can afford
Yo,
it
I was
can
in a
afford it.
gang
It's like,
in middle school.
So why is education mandatory? Do you think there's a good explanation for it? So for Alan,
yeah, I think it provides a public good. You know, like why do we have highways?
it provides
I
a
think-
public good in the same way that mandatory college might.
Yeah, but again, I think if you're in college, right?
But
If
the
you're
fact is, it's just the fact that you're 18 at this point. Then it's like it's not so much about the public good, like mandating the public good. It's about, you know, like now we have to weigh, you know, individual choice a little bit more.
yeah, well, so here's the thing. Like, if I were designing government, if we were going back to Kevin's prompt, arbitrarily, I would decide, yeah, everyone should go to college in something. I would say yes, that should happen. I don't design policy. I don't know what went into that, right? I just, you know, I think there's enough evidence to suggest that college does help your life, and that you as an adult can make decisions to help your life or not. And equity in our society is helped out by making those opportunities to help your life more available to more people,
But
right?
at that point, you probably wouldn't even set the age of majority to 18, right? You would set it to 25, which is when the brain is fully developed, according to science, apparently.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and I would also outlaw cigarettes and alcohol and shit, but you know, whatever. I'm not designing law.
I guess the
just-
point
I-
is, yeah, we've designed this arbitrary line at age 18 where we think that people are mature enough to function in society without any restrictions. And that's what everything is based on that, right? Everything, except the alcohol thing. But, you
Yeah,
know.
I mean, I definitely think, like I said, right, like the whole point of K through 18 is not, it's not to take away you like knowing how to do fucking like, I don't know, algebra and like trigonometry and shit like that. That's not what you're like, that's not what you send kids mainly for K through 12. That's not what you expect them to take away. It's just to be like functioning like adults of society, like knowing how to like get along with people, knowing how to make bonds and friendships and shit like that. That's in my opinion, the point of like K through 12.
So why do we even have classes in K through 12? We should just put them, you know, in this little daycare. They can play their little games as long as they're, you know, being watched by their teachers in this daycare. Then that's all we need. I
But you still
disagree
need
with
to
you,
provide
Nigel, is what
them-
I'm trying to say. I think it is important that they learn math and, you know, English and history. Like I think the classes themselves are important, and the education itself is important. Is what I'm trying to say. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, in college is sort of like a next level to that. I don't know if it should be mandatory. I mean, yeah. Nigel, do you really not think that like there's this education value to primary school?
I think there is. There's a big education value, but I think that it like the other element of mental development is way more important than the education.
I agree. Socializing is also important. Yes, but there's a reason that it's not just like
Yeah.
literally
course.
daycare for you know
Yeah.
everybody up to 18 years old. They're learning stuff, right? Like I think that's valuable.
I mean, I think I don't know, when I think of like an analogy to this, I would also think of therapy, right? Like I think it's a huge injustice, not when like someone who needs therapy chooses not to go, but I think it's a way worse injustice when someone who like wants therapy can't afford it, right? In Allen world, everyone would get free therapy, and it would be mandated. 1 hour every 2 weeks, you go in and talk your feelings out.
Maybe we should have done that topic.
What
But,
would
uh,
Allen World look like?
Alan,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
benevolent
I mean-
dictator.
But like similarly, you know, I think it's a lot worse that someone who wants to go to college can't afford it, rather than someone go to college and waste it, or like you know, like everyone who wants to go should be able to get it. I think it provides that much good.
I
Right. It's not
agree
like
with
the-
that. Yeah, I think that's the thinking behind all like universal social programs, right? Like healthcare or whatever. Like a common conservative argument is that, oh, if we give everyone free healthcare, then people will just go to the doctor whenever they feel sick or for, bullshit, right?
Which is
But
such a cheap thing to do.
the worst,
It's
yeah,
so much
the
cheaper.
worst,
Like-
the worst thing is that people get cancer and they don't do anything about it, right?
So you feel that way about college? What about like housing?
I believe in universal housing.
Yeah, I agree.
actually feel
Same
very
thing with
strongly
housing.
about that. Yeah.
It costs our society so much money
boy.
that people are homeless
Yeah,
and that they
could
aren't
be-
going in for regular checkups.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that's more important than education, right? Like in a college education, like
Yeah, I mean, I have very
abundantly
radical
more
views of
important.
housing.
I don't think so, because like
I think
I think
housing
there's
is
a lot of shit you get from like education that prevents you from being a fucking sociopathic a criminal. How much does one criminal cost society? $1 million, $2 million? Like one guy who goes on a rampage, either one day or throughout the course of his life, could cost society millions.
You're saying college
How much would it
decriminalizes
cost to put
people?
him in school?
I feel like that's giving too much credit to the undergraduate institutions.
No,
Like,
sorry, I thought
psychopaths
Ozzy
are
was
still
saying-
psychopaths. Going
Right,
through
I
4
thought Ozzy
years
was
of
saying
whatever
basic
doesn't
education.
change that.
Yeah, Ozzy was saying basic education though, right? Like,
like oh no
versus
no no
housing.
I was talking about college. Like if I don't know,
college,
in
college,
our
yeah,
world,
yeah.
everybody gets therapy if they need it. Everybody gets free college if they need it. In Allen world, people should get free housing if they need it. I think that should be the
Yeah,
first thing.
I agree.
right?
I totally
Yeah.
agree with that.
Yeah.
And the thing is, those things exist in the U.S. right now, right? Like there are programs like in Jacksonville where they're trying to find rent for people at like $650 per room to get people off the streets, right? And that market price is a little too low for the market, and so they have people living on the streets still because they can't. Like the minimum they'd need to pay for each person to get a room would be like $800, but they don't have that in their budget for this program, right? So instead, people live on the streets. And every time they have some acute, horrible illness, they go into the hospital, cost the taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars, go back out in the streets, repeat the cycle, eventually commit some crime. It's so expensive versus just having the extra $150 a month to give them free housing, right?
I guess what underlies this entire discussion is this idea that humans, financial history and their economic value isn't the only dimension upon which they should be kind of organized, right? Because every time we talk about, okay, university costs X, they can only make Y, it doesn't seem affordable for them, and it doesn't make sense financially, then we're like, oh, but there are all these other reasons why you should go to college anyways, even though financially it may not make sense for you. So is that kind of a fair take on everyone's opinions here? Like why university being free could have value in that sense? So just to kind of get rid of the economic impediment, because there's more to it than just the financial benefit to undergraduate students.
Makes people more worldly, right? They meet more people and all that stuff.
It makes people less, like xenophobic and racist, like.
Okay, so those specific items, like I gotta express my reservations about. Does it make people more worldly? Well, it surely depends.
I don't know.
on-
I was sort of saying it sarcastically. I just I feel like that sort of plays into the idea of college sort of being like a luxury thing, where people tell themselves that this is what college does.
And whether it makes them more tolerant or not, I don't know either, because a lot of times, you go to like a university and you meeting people with very radically different ideas, whether you turn into a tolerant person or kind of an angry person as a result. I think it's a coin toss. Like how
Well,
are you
I don't
supposed
think
to-
it's
I
a
think
coin
we
toss.
have one.
I think
Sorry.
there's good evidence to suggest it's primarily in the opposite direction. You're primarily less biased against other groups, less prejudiced. I don't see any studies that claim the opposite.
Yeah, but we have one big piece of evidence that it makes more people likely to vote for the Democratic Party. So take from that what you will, but it seems to be in line with the anti-racist thing, right? At the minimum. I mean, I'm not saying that we should give everyone free college so that they all become Democrats, but
That's
that
what
is
it's
one
starting to sound like.
clear
Justin.
outcome over the past 10 years. Is
They're
that
like,
the
we're
most,
going to beat the Southern strategy.
the single
We're gonna
biggest
get everyone
predictor of
education.
Democratic swing in this year's election was how many college educated people lived in the county, right? Yeah, that's it.
Was that the strongest predictor?
I think so. It's
Is that
either that
stronger
or
than
like
race?
urban density.
Was that stronger than race?
I think it's definitely stronger than race because like black people and most minority groups voted more in favor of Trump than they did in 2016.
Yeah, more than in the past, right? But like relative, like for instance, if like is a population that's 60% black versus 60% college educated, which one is more likely to be more democratic?
Well, I'm talking about the swing, not the
Okay.
magnitude of each. Yeah.
How does income play a role in that? I'm curious. Was there
Well,
any?
I mean, the exit
common-
polls showed that Trump won people making over 100K, which seems counterintuitive, but
What do
Why
people
does it seem
say?
counterintuitive?
Like when you're young and if you're young and a conservative, you have no heart, and if you're old and a liberal, you have no brain.
My dad says that all the time.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Yes, that sounds very
My
familiar.
mom has a simpler take. Her take is always, if you're a conservative, you have no brain.
You're a conservative, you have no brain. Okay.
So like I do think like universal college has these good things for our society that go beyond the raw financial transaction of getting a job, right, and participating in the labor force. Yeah, I don't know. I think it really does fall in line with the other social programs we mentioned. Like if you're a social democrat or leaning in that person like I am, in that direction like I am, then you believe that we should have these public institutions that confer like these positive externalities that are greater than the economic,
So bringing that
impact,
back
right?
full circle then, right? it- Even if the economic calculus doesn't break even on face, as it were, right? Where, you get these folks go to undergrad, they can't pay for it themselves effectively, right? That's kind of the premise for why we want to reduce the cost of, undergraduate education to the point of being free, perhaps, right? If that math doesn't work out, then the money's got to come from somewhere to balance the book, so to speak, right? So that's going to come from kind of the rest of society writ large. So then I guess perhaps as an explanation to why it's not free at the moment is it seems like you would definitively be raising your own tax burden for some kind of general leap of faith assertion that somehow by sending all these folks to 4 more years of schooling that I will get less crime or something, like just something good will happen. I just don't feel like that's a very convincing sell to very practically minded people, right? It's like, I guarantee to pay money for something that I don't know what the heck I'm getting.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like the long-term benefit is less clear than like with universal healthcare, it's like fewer people get sick, or with universal housing, we don't have homeless people anymore, right? Those are clear, like pretty easily quantifiable impacts. But yeah, I mean, I guess the worldly nature of being educated is not. I don't know. Would it actually
there's a
make us
clear-
better off? I mean, there's some like evidence, right? That, like these states that invested in their state university systems like California and Texas have seen the most economic growth, right? They're the most innovative places and they're making all this money from these new tech industries. So
Right, and also
yeah,
if
there's a
you
correlation.
if you give a lot of money to young people who with relatively lower incomes who spend a higher percentage of their income, like you stimulate the economy more, right? That's an easy sell. Like you give 50K to a dude who makes 500K, it goes in the bank. 50K to a dude who makes 30K, like he's getting a truck or something.
But like
Truck?
that seems kind of, I mean, I'm going to simplify this a little bit, right? If I'm the car manufacturer and I gave him 50K just so that he can give me the 50K back, but I give him a truck, that sounds pretty dumb to me from a business perspective, right? So like stimulate the economy is a bit of a hack here as a
Well, but
argument.
he gives you the 50K back and he invents a way to build the truck cheaper.
Well, okay,
That's
but
the
that's
thing.
completely separate. I can pay him to invent the way to build the truck cheaper. So why don't we just do that instead of taking 50K out of my pocket in the first place, right?
Well, fuck those guys. That's why we shouldn't have businesses making policy decisions, right? Like you're right, because we can never if your question is should we take your 100K in taxes and create 200K in value in the economy, or just leave you the 100K, every business is going to say leave me the 100K. So
But in your situation you just described, there was no multiplicative effect going on. It was a simple transfer my wealth to him so that he could transfer it back to
well,
me
yeah, but
when
what
I give
what
him a
I'm
car.
saying
It's
is
just giving him a
there's
free
no
car.
amount. Yeah, but there's no amount of societal good that could convince a business to reduce value to its shareholders, right? Which is why you can't be looking to businesses to validate like policy decisions.
Okay, I think that's a quite a different argument being made.
Well, yeah, but you're saying
now.
to convince like practical minds, right? I don't know why the stakeholder here is like a car manufacturer, right? Like,
Well,
yeah. I mean,
someone.
you could tell him it'll
Justin
benefit
was the
him.
one who brought up the truck, right? Or maybe you brought up the truck.
No,
That's
no,
why
I brought up the
said
truck. I
car
was just saying it'll like if you're looking at like broadly. I was saying if you look broadly at voters who are voting on like say the economy because it's very important to them, a great argument you could use is, you know, you give more money to poor people, to people who need the money, and it goes straight back into the economy. I'm not saying you use that to appeal to like business owners.
Well,
right?
I'm saying that that's a bad argument using my example, because when you say give money to poor people, yes, they spend it, but where did the money come from? They weren't the ones being taxed to begin with, right? It's like the car manufacturer. It's the people who have the money to begin with, right? You're trying to tell them by taking money away from you, they'll give it back to you. And you know, it just doesn't seem to make sense.
Okay, the real loophole is that, you know, interest rates are at zero, the United States prints its own money, and we can just deficit spend eternally. That's the real loophole, right? The money gets printed and it comes out of thin air.
Well,
and that's really the argument
actually,
for all.
that's actually not true either. It's seigniorage, I know, and there's America enjoys the privilege of having a very big tolerance range, how much they can print before shit hits the fan. But there is a limit. It's not like a panacea.
Oh, I know, but you can look at like right now, right?
It's
like
when the
printer
runs out of ink. That's the limit.
Yeah,
we spent $1 trillion on coronavirus stimulus, and you know everything seems to be humming along just fine. I've seen a lot of arguments recently about how we should just continue deficit spending because of the record low interest rate, and there would be no negative consequences. So that's what I'm saying, right? It's like, yeah, it's not a direct transaction because there's this like money printer in the background that it's just humming.
Money
along.
printer go brr.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, we've seen what happens to economies who just kind of print. Like America again enjoys the privilege of being on the world stage, being its currency being playing such a pivotal role, right? So, but that will be eroded as you print, and that's going to cause other problems. So I would not recommend, but I agree in the short term it will work. Like probably for the next 3 years or something. You know, just print all the expenditures.
When people like Bernie Sanders and other social democrats argue for free college, that's their justification, right? It's like we have the capacity to deficit spend and fund all of these social programs. And the theory, of course, is that ultimately it will be paid back with a booming economy that is, you know, full of innovative tech jobs or whatever. But in the medium term, like, yeah, we have the capacity. Why not do it? You know?
So it's a big leap of faith as far as getting everything full circle.
Well, I don't know.
I mean, again, you go back to like the general correlation between income and education level.
Yeah, I think I saw something recently where a lot of like major Fortune 500 company executives signed something called like advocacy for like stakeholder economics or something. Did you guys see that? Yeah, so they're moving away from like the whole idea of like shareholder run businesses where like the only goal is to maximize value to the shareholder to maximizing value for like the stakeholder. I think there's a lot of debate around like, is this a real thing? Is this like where they're actually going to try to help their communities and help their workers and help like the environment, or is this just like a publicity stunt, right? But the whole idea being that businesses that can promote social good and that can create productivity across society and everything are ultimately helping their own interests. Whereas businesses, they're only interested in like shareholder value or like only interested in like short-term benefits, right? So I don't know. I don't think it's like a simple, you know, do we give them the money now when it hurts us? And maybe like I think a lot of business leaders are seeing that with the right kinds of investment that it will help their enterprise in the long term.
Yeah, I think you can look to like some other countries as like instructive examples of like how these very broad and generous like welfare programs have evolved to support market economies, right? Like Singapore, for example, the government owns 75% of the land, and they've just built these huge public housing developments that house about the same percentage of the people there, right? But it's also considered one of the freest economies in the world, right? It's
I mean,
very
in
free market, low tax
Singapore-
rate.
On Singapore specifically, I can't claim to be an expert, but my limited understanding is it's because its money doesn't come from the population per se. It's because it's on the way for so much, water-based trade, and they just
Sure.
they get a cut out of it for all
yes, it
intents and
is.
purposes, right? So that's why you can just with impunity just invest in your population, keep people happy, because you don't depend on them for money, you depend on them for legitimacy, right? So it's a very different calculus.
Well, I was going to say you could also look to the Nordic countries, or really all of Europe, Western Europe, right? And they've built these very robust and generous systems for education and housing and other, welfare. But it all supports like a capitalistic economy, right? All of them are market economies, and they all are doing very well, especially Germany. And it's because they've kind of socialized all of these negative externalities and with these really efficient systems.
I mean, the last time the European financial system came under strain, the story takeaway I got from it was Germany was pissed at all of its compatriots saying, I'm the only one working and creating value. Y'all are just using the euro to like subsidize your peeps and like give yourself political legitimacy. There's no economic return on that. So Germany's generating value, they're bleeding value, and it's a subsidization, right? Like that's what
sure. I won't get into the whole austerity EU thing, but like Germany, on its own seems to be a good example of like, or any like mixed economy, really. Even the United States, where we've socialized, like we have Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, and all these great programs that subsidize healthcare and housing and whatever costs for millions of people, right? But it all supports this idea that we have a market economy where most things are provided privately and wealth is generated, blah blah blah.
Singapore would be like Allen Land. You're chewing gum on the streets, straight to the prison yard. Get this shit beat out of you. Fucking no more chewing gum for you. Smoking a cigarette, same treatment. You're gone.
Yeah, they're wild. But I think they really do believe that in order to have their little utopia, they can't let everyone, be as free as they would be in the West. And maybe they're right. I don't know.
Osmond, Nigel, you guys have any thoughts? I think the three of us have been kind of taking turns back and forth for a while now.
I don't know. I mean, I guess nothing really pertinent to what you guys were talking about. I was just thinking about like what free college would look like. Like what parts of it would be free? Would it just be the tuition, or would it be like when you go to school, transportation is free? There's a school bus.
Alcohol.
Only the alcohol.
Yeah, that's the only really important part of college, right?
Wait, Ozzy, have you seen the details of the rice investment?
No.
Yeah, like about like you guys, the news like a couple of years back about how they're like making rice free to a large number of students.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like different thresholds, right? Like at a certain threshold, they're paying for everything, tuition,
flights.
your housing, flights, everything, right? Like and at a certain one, they're only paying for like tuition and fees, and for another one that like. So it's like tiering based on your household income, which I thought was really interesting.
That just makes me think. Yeah, that's really like to Kevin's like earlier point. Distorting the market economy, in a way. It's. I mean, like that's like right. Like what is it in It's like perfect price discrimination. Like you pay the amount that you can pay, so that you can get so that you can actually buy it.
Yep, exactly.
Which I don't know. I was sort of like I feel like marketed as a bad thing in my econ class. I mean, it distorts the market economy. So
I mean, you taught me econ, so I can't. I don't.
So whatever. Something dead
it.
weight, or like something the supplier gets all of the benefit because they're like able to like perfectly price discriminate.
Yeah, there's some like gap in efficiency or something, right? I'm seeing some like I'm recalling a stairway. Like steps. Am I recalling correctly?
I don't know about a stairway, but so yeah, I don't know. I'm just wondering like if we I guess, yeah, I don't know. We could make a free college system where, yeah, we perfectly price discriminate. That's one way to do it. Or it could just be free for everybody. That's sort of what I've been thinking about.
So can we like summarize real quick what are the non-financial benefits of an undergraduate education?
Great question. I don't know.
You get less racist, you get less xenophobic, you challenge your existing framework that you grew up and lived in.
I think it enables specialization like more easily than a K through 12 education.
And this
like-
is not financial related.
Wait, I thought that would certainly be a financially related.
When I say specialization, I mean like specialization of people. Like I am now studying physics because of my time in undergraduate, right? Like 6 years ago, I had no idea that I'd be doing this. I feel like I was sort of a little bit more aimless, but then I think my time at college helped focus me and my interests.
Well,
I don't know if that really counts as a benefit. That's just one thing that counts.
Yeah, I could see that. I wanted to be a doctor, and then I realized that my personality was that of an aimless freeloader, and so now I want to work in professional services, the world for aimless freeloaders.
Yeah.
So you feel the specialization is a non-financial benefit?
Yes, I think that's sort of
This man's about to go
like
find
a
dark
broad.
matter.
I think it's like a broad benefit of like college for a civilization. It's like, oh, we have a university. It's like, you know, in Civ, like, oh, we have a university now. Now I can get a great scientist who can focus on working on chemistry or something like that. Like, you know, it's
okay. So I guess what you're trying to say is if we don't think of the institution's existence as a part of the, like, because I guess in my formulation, it's just the next step in the assembly line, so to speak, right? So it's part of the human capital production capabilities of a society, right? But that's a very economically like viewpoint or point of view on what the purpose of university is. So that's why I guess it struck me as odd to say that the specialization is non kind of economic or financial dimension of university. But I guess it does kind of cover both realms, so to speak, right?
yeah. I mean, you know, yeah, sure. It is probably when you step back enough, really just contributing to the productivity, I guess. Of people.
Well, I kind of thought of it as like, you know, people often ask like, why do we make our elementary school kids take music, right? Or whatever, right? Music isn't a useful job skill. But, you know, we wouldn't want to live in a world where we don't have like people specializing in these like kind of cultural, historic, artistic endeavors that, you know, don't really generate wealth or improve productivity or whatever. So yeah, I see one purpose, one benefit for society is that we have people advancing and discovering, you know, culture in a way that they wouldn't otherwise be able to.
I don't know.
Musicians
I feel
have
like
been the grifters of society forever. Like they've always relied on patrons, on concerts, on fans. You know, they provide no real economic value. But
Well, that's not
always
what
on
I'm
the sideline.
saying.
I was
but,
gonna
like,
say-
I was trying not to make it come off that way.
I don't know,
That's
things
how
like
they are.
I don't know, things like culture. I'm actually curious if there's like a study on this or whatever, but like things like music, culture, arts, I feel like those play an implicit role in like the productivity of like.
Well,
I don't
yeah,
know.
I see this as like trying to answer the question of like, what is the point of an art appreciation class? Like, what benefit does it give you?
So
And-
yeah, that's what I'm saying. It like improves just like. It's like it's hard to quantify it, but like
Well, that's exactly right. It's hard to say like, oh, you have an appreciation for culture. Like,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same
you're
benefit.
more knowledgeable.
It's the same benefit you get out of, I don't know, like you being really knowledgeable about music, right? Like, is this economically productive? You're like, you know, I don't know if I would call it a hobby, but you seem to be very knowledgeable about music broadly, the music industry, different bands, I mean, in a way you're
I guess.
cultured, right? Like, and I mean, that's
Yeah.
a cool thing about you that I think really adds to like the human aspect of Justin Rain, right? Like it's an interest of yours that I mean, and it's like, it's why I love making great people in Civ. It's like, oh, I've made Mozart. It's amazing.
Oh yeah, honestly, that's so sad. That's honestly the most satisfying part. Like
Yeah.
when you hear the music and you see like the quote from them.
Yeah. I love it. I think it's so nice.
Yeah,
So,
just
I think-
building spots for it.
And it makes it more worthwhile when you go destroy other civilizations, great people.
I don't know about that.
Like
Well,
fucking
so I
Albert
think you
Einstein was
guys-
not Albert Einstein was not born in my civilization. He can't exist in other civilizations.
I
Well,
was
you know,
about
the
to
point-
say,
Oh, sorry.
I think there's a very interesting point that kind of came through here, which is kind of like, I guess one of the struggles we've been having is, which is almost causing us to talk past each other, is we're talking about things in the abstract, like generally, what are the benefits? Generally, what are the downsides? Generally, what are the costs? But kind of in the way you guys are talking about music and whatnot, sure, okay, it's reasonable to believe that there's some sort of even economic benefit, if not quantifiable, okay, to these sorts of studies. But then would it then make sense then for everything to kind of stay in its own lane? And what I mean to say is something like, the musicians and whatever income they're able to generate, they're the ones responsible for feeding it back into the system to subsidize and support future music students to pursue this career, right? So it's kind of the amount of resources being committed to, getting people through this kind of pipeline is directly proportional to the amount of good that pipeline ultimately generates for society in the longer term, right? Because a musician has a 40-year, 30-year, 40-year career. Actually, I don't know how long their careers are, but they have a long enough time horizon to where, like, even if their payout is later, if it's big enough, like, that can still be worth it, right? And if that is kind of the basis that feeds back into the system to, enable more students to study music, for example, like, I think that at once achieves the goal of kind of putting some amount of significant resources into developing people in that vein, but also doesn't piss anyone else off into saying that, like, okay, just generally you're helping people, right? Like, it's more targeted and the link is stronger.
I feel like then it
It's
gets
just-
into like sub interest or sub major. So if you're like a physicist who's doing like applied physics, or like that's more applicable to like generating patents and stuff like that, probably generates more money or return on investment than somebody who's just studying, I don't know, theoretical physics. No offense, but
Wait, Kevin, what exactly was your point? You're saying that, like, because of specialization that we get like musicians teaching musicians, and so then
You're saying, yeah,
That's good.
that's the end goal.
Like, musicians are financing musicians, right? So I think Nigel's point there is pertinent, right? Then there's a very practical slant on like everything we do, right? Because, like in the example of physics, I don't know how true this is. One might believe that applied physics is more likely to generate tangible economic results than theoretical physics, right? And in such a system that I'm envisioning, money would come from the applied physicists and they would give it to people studying applied physics, kind of leaving theoretical physicists dry, so to speak.
No,
right?
I think that's a
potential
terrible
problem.
idea.
yeah,
I think that's an idea that works in Rick and Morty. Like, have you guys seen the episode where he has the children and they funnel out? Remember, like, it's like, here's where all artists go. The musician, like, it's like engineers, scientists, doctors, the unproductives, and that's where all the artists and shit are, right? Because I think the reason it doesn't work is the holders of capital are rarely the same ones as the producers of capital, or the people who are most productive in a society, right? Like Justin's field, civil engineering, like, it's not civil engineering firms that are the ones providing the capital for civil engineers to be educated, right? Like financiers, like people on Wall Street, are rarely the ones producing value, but they're the ones who supply the capital, right? And that's why I don't think it'll work, right? Like, I think you'd be more aligned to like supplying capital to what's needed in our current system than saying artists fund artists. Well, here's the news. The artists can't fund the other artists because artists got no fucking money unless Taylor Swift decides to fund every artist on earth.
Well, that's
There's
what I'm
no-
saying. Like,
there's no
if
system.
art is so good, right? I think it should, like, the amount of good that it has to be able to manifest at some point. We can't say
Well,
it's
but no,
ambiguous
I don't
forever.
think so, right? Because like again, civil engineering on like as a good example is not something that is especially lucrative. It's not something that produces like exceptional value, right? Like in terms of like economically, but it's essential to our society to run. Right?
Wait,
Same
wait.
with, like-
I think those statements are contradictory.
No,
If
no.
it-
Sorry. I mean in the sense that like when you are employed as like a civil engineer, you are not making the same kind of money as a hedge fund guy, right? And I think that's because of the nature of the job, right? The nature of a job is, and Justin, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just talking the abstract. You know, you get commissioned by the government to do some kind of task. You get paid for the task. The government has limited resources, and then you get what's left of that, right? Hedge fund guys make like money off the 2% for managing pension fund, you know, billions of dollars, right? Whereas, you know, if we look at like the good they provide to society, like I think you could measure the good a civil engineer produces, and significantly more than a hedge fund guy. But because of the natures of their profession, there's less capital inflow to what a civil engineer might get, which is why I don't think you could have the idea of like professions financing people within their profession. Like
Maybe
you did
Kevin's
in,
point
like,
is that like, you know, this capital flow that's coming into civil engineering is sort of market determined, and like the value has been like reinforced in that way, self-reinforced in that way.
I was about to say, right, like there's that joke about how like people who major in like Egyptian history are doing so to teach other people who are majoring in Egyptian history down the road, right? And it's just this endless loop of people becoming Egyptian history PhDs. But like the value add is that, you know, these students enjoy learning Egyptian history and they're willing to pay some like large amount of money to get a degree in it, right? And really, I mean, the entire point of the economy is to produce things that make people happy, right? Like dishwashers and knowledge about the universe and whatever. So if you think of it that way, like the value add is always that, you know, the people who major in music and the engineers and everyone in between are all like doing things that enhance the human experience that people are willing to pay for, right? People are people are willing to pay to learn about the pyramids, and some people are like willing to pay to have a more efficient dishwasher, right? It's like,
yeah,
Consider the alternative, which is, and I'm not saying I want to learn about Egyptian history, but say we both wanted to learn about Egyptian history, you and I, Justin, okay? But you, being the responsible one, realize that Egyptian history isn't going to pay. It's going to be worth anything, right? So I'm going to study something else that I don't like as much, but that's for my livelihood, right? So you make that decision. And then I go study Egyptian history. And so you're like, well, Kevin's happy, right? At least he walks away a happier person than Justin, who's studying how to make dishwashers. But then 4 years later, Kevin's not so happy because he realized, oh shit, this doesn't keep the lights on. So then it's kind of like, it's kind of a short-term thing. It goes back to Osman's idea about a luxury, right? If we kind of frame it as a luxury thing where it's kind of, oh, you can just study whatever you want without caring about the consequences. This is what you get. You get buyer's remorse. They're like, shit, no one told me that, you know, this isn't gonna like work, right? You know,
yeah.
it's like,
Yeah, I don't know. I guess to your point about like physicists finding physicists, musicians finding musicians, and all that stuff, like I think specialization is important, and like it's important for like these specialists to get funding from like outside resources, because like when you develop these specialists, you can get maybe, you know, greatness. That greatness can maybe push society forward in a like difficult to measure, like sometimes unforeseen way. And like on the short term, it, you know, like maybe the market is not like robust enough for it to like really
Ozzy, you're thinking of a eureka moment in Civ right now, aren't you?
something like
You're
that.
like,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, they discovered this. Boom, technology increase.
Yeah, or I mean, technology or musicians, right? Like, is as long as like, you know, like having musicians fund musicians would be a bad idea, because like, yeah, they're not gonna make enough money, or like, you know, this Egyptian history thing, like they're not gonna make enough money for it to really last like, you know, not even 4 years is what Kevin said, right? Like at the end of 4 years, it's like it's over, right? But like I think you make these investments as a society into these like different specializations, like where it's money coming from society as a whole and not just like on this like the specialist branch, because yeah, you hold out for like those eureka moments, those great moments that like, you know, push society forward in some unforeseen, difficult to measure way.
I feel like there's maybe more immediate. Sorry, Alan.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I feel like there's an even more immediate impact, right? Like going back to the Egyptian history major, like how do Egyptian history departments stay afloat, right? They are funded by universities, and those universities get grants from the federal government to study Egyptian history issues, right? Go on expeditions to the pyramids and whatever. And what is the purpose of that? Well, we generally have an interest in knowing about Egyptian history, and people are like interested in the topic. Everybody knows about mummies and shit and their popular Halloween costumes. But like tangibly, people go to museums and they spend money there to learn about Egyptian history, and it has an impact in TV shows, and it appears in movies like Indiana Jones.
Ancient
Like-
aliens.
Like, yeah, right. Like, so there's a cycle to like knowing about these things that has a payback, because people are entertained by Egyptian history, and ultimately
The question then
there's
becomes
value in
how
knowing
much
it.
value, and can it cover the costs, right? And that's kind of what this proposition looks at. It's kind of like whatever value that this profession can generate is the maximum amount we're going to be putting back into generating more people in the profession, right?
Well,
Like that
no,
seems
see,
fair in the
that-
abstract, I think.
I feel like that, yeah, I think a system where that worked was like the guild system, right? Back in like the Middle Ages. But yeah, to Ozzy's point, like in the age of like increasing subspecialization, where the value that you produce might seem really vague at first, might take decades or generations to pay off, but it needs to be done. Like for instance, what is the field of what did the field of machine learning contribute like in its infancy? Like nothing, right? So it's like a scientist goes, I want to study machine learning, and the university's like, well, congrats, you're being funded by all of the machine learning engineers before you. Oh, congrats, there's none. Fuck you, you don't get shit, right? There's no way to fund novel shit because there's no predecessors, right? Like, or fields that were previously not profitable but suddenly became profitable, right? Like how long ago did Jeff Bezos say, I sell books, and so, oh, congrats, Jeff Bezos. The total pool of value you can extract your funding from is the pool of value of Barnes and Noble's, fucking secondhand books or whatever, right? And because people can't anticipate the long-term abstract value that something previously kind of obscure can provide, right? Like Amazon was a bookstore. You guys remember that? Like you used to get Amazon gift cards and you'd use it to buy like a reader or a book or something.
now
yeah,
Lex
I mean,
now Lex Luthor sells whatever he wants.
Yeah, dude.
I think the
Hey, I thought it was
libertarian
hilarious.
answer
Yep.
here is that, kind of like what you were saying, Kevin, the market would just sort it out. And some people, the ones who are most advantaged, the most intelligent, whatever, rise to the top and actually make, are directly employed in their profession, and they do great groundbreaking things, and others kind of end up at Starbucks or something. I don't know. And it works because it's a market, right? And it allocates the resources efficiently. I guess I feel like we've kind of strayed from the point. Like, how does this relate back to
All right, this is about free college,
free
right?
college?
I think free college.
Like even with free college, like the market, there's still a job market, right? It'll still allocate people as it does.
So I guess I was taking this idea of a free college and maybe trying to I guess, was it functionally consider what would make sense as far as a free goes? Because I think what puts people off about it is when you just say blanket free, and it's kind of like, well, who's responsible for it, right? I think on this system, as imperfect as it may be, solves one critical issue, which is kind of saying you're never going to be footing the bill for something you don't agree with. You know what I'm saying, right? It's almost like, Jeff Bezos, in his wealth that he's accumulated from his own, endeavors in the e-commerce space, he in the current world, he's not limited to donating and investing back just into e-commerce and building that out, right? If he sees value in, financing music, he is free to do so, right? So like the parts that people in some capacity see value in, like they'll still get money as long as they can convince those people, those holders of capital, right? And I think as I say that, that's the one main objectionable bit out of all of this, which is why should the rich people get to make all the decisions on who gets kind of resources to, expand, right? Because, if in this world I'm envisioning Jeff Bezos says, fuck Egyptian history, I don't like Egyptians or something like that, right? I don't know. It's not up to me. It's up to him. And whatever he decides, this determines a lot, right? Are we comfortable with folks who are financially successful being able to make that decision, right? Because the
No.
alternative is like a government official, maybe Justin becomes like, the vice president of the United States, like, we need more Egyptian history majors and we're going to make government money go to them, right? It's more or less the same thing. Someone has to go out of their way and says, contrary to what everyone else thinks, I am right and I think we need more Egyptian history majors. And, great people are the ones who are right. Turns out 100 years later, like the fate of the world depends on Egyptian history. Maybe, right? But it's a hard sell, right? It's a really hard sell.
I think you present an interesting problem. And I think the solution that we've come up with is democracy, right? We all vote on, we vote on how much Egyptian history we want. And the government doles out money based on the will of the voters, right? That's how it works today.
Soon, guys. Yeah. Sorry. Can we wrap it up soonish? Yeah, Nigel.
Sure.
Did Nigel already peace out? All right,
I
Nigel.
guess he
Peace
did.
out.
All right. No, yeah, definitely. We had many topics today. I don't think we really came to a conclusion on whether or not we should have free college, but it's certainly an interesting conversation. So yeah, let's wrap it up.